Hey there, mamas. Happy day to you. My name is Jenny Gablesberg, if we have not had the pleasure of meeting before, and I am a pelvic health physical therapist that specializes in helping pregnant mamas and postpartum mamas kind of navigate that time period of life and learn how to recover to the best of their ability. And one of the things I want to talk with everyone today about is, was everyone really obsessed about flattening their tummy after having baby? So let me know in the comments, is that was that your top priority postpartum? And if you're still currently pregnant, is that something that's just highly on your mind right now? Is, oh my goodness, these muscles have gotten really crazy long, and I get it. I carried like a torpedo. So I totally feel your pain. But was that kind of the number one thing you thought about? Once I have this baby, or now that I'm postpartum, I really need to focus on just getting that belly tightened back in. And we see that being promoted everywhere, don't we? It's the personal trainers are all advertising how to flatten your belly. All of the celebrities are wearing all these super tight binders and saying how helpful it is to tighten your belly. And don't get me wrong, I actually really like binders, and we'll talk about those a little bit today. But society just tells us you should be looking like you never had a child. So I want that for you. But I also don't want you to go about your postpartum recovery the wrong way. And if the only thing that you're thinking about is how to flatten your stomach, we're going about it the wrong way. All right. So let's talk about a little anatomy. When you think about your pelvic floor muscles, and when we're pregnant, our bellies get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and they kind of open up a little bit, which could be called a diastasis there in the middle. And so these muscles are really over lengthened, right? So coordination is something that we really have to get back in that deep core. And I'm going to kind of delve a little bit more into that. Also, when you think about your pelvic floor muscles, like we need to give these guys more attention than what they're getting right now, is they are dropping down somewhat during pregnancy, especially that last month, baby's dropping, you're feeling a lot more pressure. These muscles are having to elongate and kind of tense to try to support all that added weight that is happening in there. And if you had a vaginal birth, now these muscles are stretched 3.5 times their normal length to let that baby's head out. Now, do not panic if you are still pregnant thinking, how the heck are those muscles going to stretch 3.5 times their normal length to be able to get that baby's head out? And I so remember at like 37, 38 weeks thinking, oh my God, like how is that getting out of there? So there is a hormone called relaxin that you get an increase in relaxin as soon as you get pregnant, and then it does spike at about 11 to 13 weeks pregnant. So if you had some aches and pains kind of at that end of first trimester and you thought, I don't even look pregnant yet, like why am I hurting? You can contribute a little bit of that to the relaxin peak that made your pelvis a little more able to move. But also our progesterone is elevating throughout our pregnancy pretty steadily. And that also is encouraging and kind of nudging our tissues into stretching, because we need that pelvis to open up more. We need those abdominals to lengthen better so we can accommodate the growth of baby. So at about 13 weeks, the relaxin comes back down, and it stays really pretty low through the rest of pregnancy until you go into labor. And when you go into labor, that relaxin skyrockets to say, all right, it's time to stretch. It's not time to tear, it's not time to rip, it's time to stretch. And you know, our bodies are brilliant in the fact that we have a plan to make all of these things happen with hopefully the most little impact to our musculoskeletal system as humanly possible. So we know we have abdominal changes. We know we have pelvic floor changes. So I want you to start to think about your lower body as a canister. So I want you to think about your diaphragm or your breathing muscle here at the top, and it comes up and down as you breathe. It's got some nice mobility. And then you have your deep transverse abdominis in the front. And then we have our pelvic floor muscles on the bottom. And then we have our multifidus, our deep stabilizers on the back. So those four muscles are in what we can call our preliminary core. So if you hear a therapist talking about your core, that's what we mean, the deepest layer of muscles. And I'll talk about why in just a minute. But if you are having some other concerns with things like postpartum leakage or prolapse, as therapists, we actually think of that core going all the way up to the vocal cords, because this is where we start to manage a lot of our increased pressures when we have to lift things. But for today's chat, we are going to think about the basic diaphragm to pelvic floor, deep transverse abdominis in the front to the multifidus in the back. And so we think about that almost like a Coke can, okay? You need to have pressure on all sides of that Coke can so it doesn't explode, right? So if we think about the two main muscles that were impacted the most during pregnancy, it's our abdominals lengthening and our pelvic floor lengthening. So if you decide I'm going to wear a binder, and I really want my figure back, I'm going to cinch that binder down as tight as I can. Where's all the pressure going to go? It's going to go downward towards your pelvic floor. So I like binders. I like to support the abdominal tissue, but you have to be very careful in using them that you are not putting them on too tight that you're creating downward pressure. So I want you to envision what that means. So I am going to introduce the vulva puppet. Woohoo! So who knew that on Etsy you could get a vulva puppet for a kind of ridiculous amount of money? But here it is. So if we were thinking about these being the labia and this being the vaginal entrance, in this, just looking at it, everything's kind of tucked up in there, which is what we want. Now, if I can introduce the breast squish ball. Yeah, I'm going to use it not as a breast. I use this for other things. Just in case you were wondering, they actually sell testicle squish balls on Amazon, just in case you were curious. But right now we're talking about pressure management. So say you are wearing a binder that's way too tight, or say your muscles just aren't kicking in the way that they should, and you go to lift a car seat, or you go to lift a stroller to put it in the trunk of your car, or you go to lift that 30-pound bag of dog food for your sweet dog that is tolerating your new infant very well. Do you see what I'm saying here? So think about pelvic floor being in this direction. So you've really tightened up your abdominals, or you've coughed, or you've picked up something really heavy and you've created pressure in your belly. All of that goes down. And what we can see is that our organs are encouraged downward. So this could be that the bladder is further down than it should be. It could be that the rectum is further down into the vaginal canal than it should be. Now, granted, there are walls here, so it's not like your bladder's going to fall out or your rectum's going to fall out. They're pushing the vaginal wall down and creating just a little much descent down here. This can feel like heaviness, a falling out feeling, like you've got a tampon halfway inserted and it's going to come out, but basically a dragging or pressure type feeling. So we don't want that happening. I'm just going to take this sucker out because it's too big. We want you to cough and barely anything to happen. We want you to lift a bag of dog food, barely anything happen. We want you to be able to lift a toddler and a car seat and have nothing happen. there's a lot of things we lift as moms. I mean, a ridiculous amount, because you see a mom with a toddler on one hip and a car seat on the other and a diaper bag that's crazy heavy. And maybe there's one bag from CVS hanging off the other arm. We're creating a ton of pressure down into that system. And so what happens is something's going to get shoved on if your only concern postpartum is tightening your belly. Okay, so we think about the deepest belly muscle, the transverse abdominis, and your pelvic floor muscles, which actually you can see better here, your pelvic floor muscles, they're best friends. So think about those little girls you see on the playground, kind of hand in hand, walking along together. That's your pelvic floor and your transverse abdominis. They don't go anywhere without each other, which is really lovely that before we cough, our pelvic floor and our transverse abdominis kick in. Think about like an eighth of a second before that happens. Our brain knows something's going to happen, and it automatically tightens in before it happens to help us manage those pressures. If you've made the decision to lift up that stroller and get it into the trunk of your car, your brain knows that you have done that. And those muscles kick in automatically. Automatically is the key there. And help protect prolapse, help protect us from leaking, help protect us from developing pelvic pain if we're not able to stabilize or keep our pelvis really sturdy and robust in our postpartum time. So before pregnancy, that happened automatically. And then you grew a human and the muscles got really lengthened. They might have gotten cut through, they might have gotten torn. And now those muscles just don't remember what it's like to have that pre-contraction or that coordination. And we have to have that to manage our load transfer. So there is a pelvic health researcher out of Australia that if you ask pretty much any pelvic health physical therapist, we probably all have like a nerd crush on this guy because he is brilliant and he has just created so much fantastic research for us to base our treatment plans off of. So we love him. And just to listen to him too, that Australian accent, it's a little sexy. It's a little like, I really like listening to him, especially in person, which I've been lucky enough to do about 3 times, I think. But let's go back to the research. One of the things that he was looking at was people with back pain. And so they did brain scans of people with back pain, and they were looking at what part of the brain, what part of the motor cortex specifically was activating the deep transverse abdominis, because we know the timing and coordination and finesse of that transverse abdominis, that deepest muscle, is what prevents us from having back pain. Like we need just that beautiful coordination to happen to protect our core. So they had a group who had back pain and a group who did not have back pain. And the group who did not have back pain, pretty much dead on top of the motor cortex, controlled the transverse abdominis. And then they brain scanned all the people who had back pain. And it actually was about 2 inches posterior. So anytime they tried to fire that muscle, it wasn't firing in the same place. So what they did was, I think it was 20 weeks, 16 to 20 weeks of focused, intentional, tedious exercise addressed all towards the transverse abdominis, first in isolation, and then progressing it with other muscles, because we know in real life it works with other muscles, but you have to start with the isolation first. And then when they redid the brain scans, all of them were moving forward. So it wasn't just that their pain was getting better, they were changing with those subtle, finesse, gentle, isolated contractions. They were changing the way the brain fired the muscle. That's what we want. So do we need strength? Yes. Do we need endurance? Yes. But what we really need is the brain and our deep core muscles talking to each other, having this beautiful conversation. There's no confusion, there is no conflict, this beautiful conversation. So when we move and bend and pick our babies up off the ground, or lift them up above our heads, or help them onto the swings or the slide at the playground, all those things, our muscles just know what they're doing and automatically kick in to take care of us. So I had a personal trainer come in who was probably about a year postpartum, and she actually owned a personal training company that focused on postpartum mamas. She had this darling little name, and her little logo was a mama duck and like 3 little baby ducks behind. All she treated was, or all she worked with were new moms. And she comes in and says, I still look like I'm 3 months pregnant. My child is now 1. Like, what am I doing wrong? I'm doing crunches. I'm doing all these activities. Well, she jumped past all of those subtle, focused, intentional exercises that we need to be doing and jumped into really high level stuff. And that deep core never kicked back in. The muscles we see, the 6-pack muscle, the external obliques, those two especially, they kick in. They will grab and hold. They won't flatten your belly at all. They won't help you with your coordination and load transfer much. We really need that deep transverse abdominis kicking in. So I had to take her way back down to those subtle isolated exercises and slowly progress her. Now, could she still be doing her arm weights and her leg weights and her cardio? Totally, totally. But she had to devote some time every day to getting those really subtle muscles to kick in so the coordination worked. So once her belly got flat, because she was actually using the right muscles, she then sent in 2 of the other personal trainers that worked with her because they all had the same problem. They all had really overactive external obliques, which is one of our muscles that comes obliquely across our bellies that help us twist and bend. And they were just grabbing and holding on for dear life. And that deep core that, you know, it's more important because it controls our pressures, but it's also really lovely that it does help flatten our bellies. So they didn't have any of that. So again, took them back down, progressed them through a better, slower progression to get that coordination kicking again, and all their symptoms resolved, which was really great because they were actually much further out postpartum than what we normally see. So working on those subtle core muscles, the deep transverse abdominis and the pelvic floor, they help with treating incontinence. They help with treating a pelvic prolapse. They help if you're having some pelvic girdle pain with activity. They help with if you are struggling with a diastasis and not being able to control your belly really well. And they help flatten your stomach. So you end up with the result that you were going for, but you are going at it in a much more structured, intentional way than just jumping back into doing a million crunches and wearing a super tight binder and thinking all about flatten, 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 flatten. There is a much better way to do that. I had a darling older patient years ago that was in her 60s, and she came in and she was the most skeptical thing ever to enter my practice. And she had fecal incontinence, she had urinary incontinence, she got up 6 times at night to pee, and it was all about, oh, everybody gets up to pee when you're my age. My sister gets up to pee all the time when my age. Oh yes, I've had that leakage since I had babies. Like, totally, this is something that is absolutely common and normal, and you're not going to be able to help me do anything about it. And so she was a bit of a case to try to sweet talk and nudge into realizing that I might be able to provide some value to her. And we worked together 4 or 5 months to retrain that deep core, to retrain her pelvic floor, to retrain some of her bladder habits that were getting her up repetitively at night. And at the end of it, all those things were resolved. And she'd been suffering with them for decades. But one of the things that she was the most pleased with was the fact that her pants fit better, which annoyed me a little at the time. I totally get it, that it's really nice to have your belly to feel a little flatter, but I really thought getting rid of the fecal incontinence would have been a little higher in value on her list of things that she appreciated about coming to physical therapy. But whatever the case, we got the muscles working the way that they were supposed to be working by really focusing on isolated, soft, slow exercises that helped retrain the way that brain fires that muscle, helps with the coordination, and long-term helps with our load transfer or pressure management, so we don't end up with any persistent problems postpartum. So that is our chat for today. I hope you learned something. I hope that if your primary thought is, how am I going to flatten this belly now that I've had a baby, or how am I going to flatten this belly as soon as the baby comes out, I hope that I've been able to influence your thinking a little, that you need to think about pelvic floor as well. You need to think about some subtle, isolated, low-grade exercises, and then work on progressions from there. All right, I will chat with you soon. Come back again. This was fun.